Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever felt you needed to shake things up, get out of your comfort zone, and discover who you truly are, what you're made of, and what you can do in life, then do we have the confidence building show for you. Today I'll be talking with Roz Savage, likely the greatest female rowing adventurer of all times, and the author of Rowing the Atlantic and Stop Drifting, Start Rowing, One Woman's Search for Happiness and Meaning Alone in the Pacific. Today we'll talk about stepping outside your comfort zone, serving a higher purpose, discovering your own inner strength, overcoming demons, and finding the courage to continue no matter what. That plus we'll talk about rowing naked, cheer me up chocolate, and the secret power of bean sprouts. So welcome to the show, Roz. Are you ready to shine?
I am shining away and looking forward to, with you, shining some rays of English sunshine into your listeners' lives.
A mighty woohoo and English
Woohoo!
sunshine.
And in fact, in rainy old England, it is actually gorgeous and sunny and spring-like today. So I'm feeling shiny all over.
So I read something, was it the Guardian, the Daily Mail? I read something this past week that just struck me about the English take on things. The Tube, apparently, they were complaining that there's too much sunshine. And so now there have been delays on the Tube because they can't read the LED screens, the conductors, to know that the platforms are clear to depart because the sun is too strong.
Over the years, we've had so many wrong kinds of British weather. We've had the wrong kind of leaves on the railway lines. We've had the wrong kind of cold. So I'm not at all surprised to find we also have the wrong kind of sunshine.
They literally, that's what they said. It's the wrong kind of sunshine.
In my book, no kind of sunshine is the wrong kind, unless maybe I'm rowing across the equator getting a serious sunburn.
Amen to that. And yes, the equatorial sun can be a little bit bright. I can't even imagine being on the mirror as you're rowing at that point. So before we dive into that and dive into the rowing, I've got to ask, did you try to become the first toddler at 18 months of age to walk across Scotland?
This is the story according to my mother. Apparently we were on vacation on the north coast of England, and I set out with great determination to go for a walk, even though my walking was a little bit wobbly at that age. And it was only with the greatest difficulty that my mother was able to persuade me that at some point I needed to turn around and come back to the family group. I don't know what that says about me as a child, but I suppose once I get an idea in my head, I can be quite stubborn and persistent about it.
Which is probably why you've survived.
It's probably what kept me going, yes, for sure.
So were you athletic growing up?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Quite the opposite. I was just useless at physical education at school. I couldn't catch and I couldn't throw, and I wasn't fast, and I was kind of small for my age, and I was also the youngest in my year. So I was not a popular choice for the games teams. I was pretty much the last one waiting to be picked, which didn't really build my confidence very much as an athlete. So it was the greatest surprise that when I went to university and took up rowing, and I really only took up rowing because I wanted to be able to eat more without getting fat.
I like that.
I know, it's pretty superficial motivation, but I found I actually loved rowing. There was something about the camaraderie and, that ultimate, I suppose, union with the other rowers in the boat, because ideally you're trying to all do exactly the same thing at the same time. That's when the boat really starts to sing along on the water. And so it was almost, I suppose, like a meditation, because you really lose yourself in the rhythm of the boat. And it was a lot more fun than studying law. So I definitely spent a lot more time on the river than in the law library.
I could see that. I'm thinking back to my last year in Hawaii, and I just started to fall in love. It became my new love, and then we had to leave, which was canoeing, and a double-hulled canoe. So you've got 8 people all canoeing in sync together. And when you got into that rhythm, it felt like the boat would lift up, be flying along in the surface, and then if you were lucky enough to be coming in and catch a wave behind you, it just clicked you into another gear and you felt like you were flying.
That sounds absolutely amazing. I have been in an outrigger canoe a couple of times. We capsized pretty spectacularly on the second time.
Oh no.
We caught the wave. Unfortunately, the wave then caught us.
Those are big to be capsizing.
Yes, it wasn't an 8-man. I think we were in I don't know even the different sizes that they come in. But yeah, it's but doesn't that really let you know the force of those waves? Nature is powerful.
It does. So before we go again, get into your trip here, we got you rowing through college, and then the real world set in. What was the real world like for you? And I put the real world in quotes here.
Yes, I'm glad that you said that. For 11 years, my real world was working in an office as a management consultant. I had grown up in a family without that much money. My parents were both Methodist preachers, and I totally bought into the Margaret Thatcher myth that having the money and the big house was going to make me happy.
Well, you went to the U.S. at, what, 16 and kind of fell in love with this
right.
lifestyle you saw.
I did. My dad did a work exchange in San Diego. So we traded places with the Methodist minister in a very affluent suburb of San Diego called La Mesa. And I was just blown away by the lifestyle there. All these huge houses with swimming pools and more than one bathroom. It was just mind-blowing for a 16-year-old. And I think this fundamental confusion arose in my mind then, this sort of association of money and happiness. And definitely there can be an association. I know for, the many billions of people in the world who are surviving on very little money a day, it must be quite hard to be happy when you're really just trying to figure out how to put food on the table. But I also have come to realize that I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, that there is not a necessary connection between money and happiness. I've had money and been miserable, and I've had no money and been happy. So it's a very loose connection, if at all.
I'm thinking about you rowing on your first trip across the Atlantic, and you're working on getting more or keeping the overdraft going. And one might argue, if not happy, that was the most alive that you'd been in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is. There was something about really owning my project. When I did my project as a management consultant, I can see now I was very much just doing the work for the money. Mm-hmm. There was nothing in the work itself that I found emotionally or aesthetically or spiritually fulfilling. I was just showing up, watching the clock, going through the motions to earn that salary check at the end of the month. And it reached the point where this lifestyle that was supposed to be making me happy, mm-hmm. I actually tumbled to the fact that I was profoundly miserable. So there was obviously something wrong with this picture. And I think that was quite a period of existential angst that for so long, from the age of 16 to my early 30s, I'd really believed that money was going to make me happy. I'd spent all of those years chasing that dream only to go, whoops.
There's a whoops. It almost sounds like, I feel like saying, will the real Slim Shady, will the real Roz Savage please stand up? You weren't being yourself.
Yeah, I later found out at the time when I was going through this disillusionment with the materialistic, yuppie London lifestyle, I thought there must be something wrong with me, because all of my friends seem really fine, just kind of jogging along on that treadmill and getting mortgaged and married. And we were all doing pretty much the same kinds of jobs, and it seemed to suit everyone else just fine. So I was thinking, what's wrong with me that I'm not fitting in well to this lifestyle? And I later found out that there is actually a name for this midlife crisis kind of thing. Jung called it individuation, and it's when we reach that point where we start wondering what we're here for. And if we're unhappy, that's sometimes or often a really good indicator that we're not on our true path. And so then we start wondering, well, what is my true path? And that really requires a whole different way of thinking and realizing that there's a lot more to us than just this superficial persona that we present to the outside world. And it's a pretty transformative / terrifying experience. Well, certainly it was for me. I felt very alone going through that.
Which may have actually been necessary.
I think it is. I guess that sort of implied situation that it is something that we have to go through alone and really look inside and say, well, what is my purpose and what is going to make me feel happy and fulfilled in this life? And that's, I started reading a ton of personal development books and really looking outside of myself for the answer. And certainly some of those books gave me some really good clues. But ultimately, no one can give us the answer to those questions.
So how did you go from a stable marriage, from 11 years in this environment, to start to pull the thread on the sweater, to unravel this, to be able to rebuild it differently?
Yeah, it really did feel like the unraveling or the ripping it up and starting again. Well, a real turning point for me did actually come out of one of those self-help books. It was the obituary exercise. So I wrote 2 versions of my own obituary, the one that I wanted and the one that I was actually heading for if I carried on as I was. And when I wrote the obituary that I really wanted, it certainly didn't mention ocean rowing, but it did mention living adventurously, living courageously, really getting out there and living life. I thought of the people whose obituaries I really enjoyed reading about, and they were the colourful characters who seemed to have packed many different lifetimes into one. And the funny thing about this was it mentioned nothing about big houses or big bank balances. It was really about just feeling really happy and confident being me. It was all about how I would feel on the inside, living this much more interesting, juicy life. And then the obituary that I was actually heading for, if I carried on as I was nice and secure, if there is such a thing as security these days, and contented. But I think I realized that contentment wasn't really what I was aiming for. And so, I had to make some really big changes, and it took a while. It's not the sort of thing that you do overnight, or maybe some braver people than I am managed to do it overnight. But for me, I had to hit a bit of a rock bottom in terms of my marriage and my career before I sort of had that dead cat bounce and was able to set about reinventing myself.
It's funny that you say that. It's not so funny. It's sad, the dead cat bounce. But it's appropriate, which is, in a sense, it's not allowing, but if we believe in a divine power or guidance or universal plan or anything, things sometimes have to blow apart in order for us to rebuild it. And so you were given that assistance in them blowing apart.
Absolutely. And it's hard for me to say how much of it was. I think there was certainly an element of self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. I think on some level, more subconscious than conscious, I knew that I needed to be free of these security blankets that I had around me. Say, as Janis Joplin said or sang, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. So I really had to reach that point of nothing left to lose so that I could be reborn, I suppose. I realise that sounds a bit evangelistic, but it's what that felt like. It was almost, and especially because I was doing so much reading around that time of spiritual books, and a wonderful group of new friends came into my life. Well, I say a group, lots of wonderful individuals came into my life who were really supporting me on this journey. And so all of these really positive influences were letting me know that I was on the right path. I was feeling very literally encouraged to carry on going this way. But I had to, something has to die for something else to be born. Mm-hmm. We have to let things go to make space for the new. And that happened quite dramatically in my life. And I think if it hadn't have been for the appearance of those wonderful new friends, I could have really freaked out at that point and maybe scuttled back into my old life. But I do think that the universe conspires to support us when we find that courage to really start asking these big questions and sincerely to look for the answers.
Woohoo!
I know it was exciting. I mean, I'm sure a lot of my friends thought, oh my God, Roz has completely lost the plot. She had it all and she's thrown it all away. Mm-hmm. But I felt so, as you said, so energized, so alive. It was like the world became a magical place. And I stopped taking myself so damn seriously. You know, up until, sorry, I realise, feel free to interrupt me.
No, keep going.
I think up until that point, I had been afraid to fail. I was really a good little girl when I was at school. I was very good at passing exams. That's how I managed to get into Oxford. I was really good at succeeding in jumping through other people's hoops. Mm-hmm. And there's a real danger that if I'd have been a bit better at my job or liked it a bit more, or if my marriage had been more sustainable, that I would have carried on just being the good little girl and conforming to other people's expectations. And so for me to actually have a failed marriage, and I mean, I like to say it succeeded for all of those years that we had together, and a failed career was incredibly liberating. It was brilliant. It's like, wow, I can fail at things and the world doesn't stop turning. It's actually all okay.
You wake up the next morning, the sun comes up.
Exactly. And so I think it also liberated me from the burden of other people's expectations. Or, you know, isn't it funny? We spent a lot of our lives, or I certainly did, spent a lot of my life living the way I thought other people wanted me to live it. They probably didn't really care all that much. I mean, obviously my parents and people close to me cared a certain amount about my life, but mostly it wasn't just that I was living my life how other people wanted me to live it. I was living it how I thought other people wanted me to live it. It's bonkers, you know. It's just crazy. And once I started living my life the way I wanted to live it, everything just became so much better.
Yay!
Yay!
So let's go from there and let's talk about briefly. You took an adventure. Was it 2003, 2004 to Peru?
2003, yeah, my first ever adventure. I went backpacking, which I'd never really done before. And I was quite inspired by, I'd just read The Celestine Prophecy, which I'm sure has been a formative book in many people's lives. And so I was really smitten, I suppose, by this new way to live, this idea of just being guided by intuition. And I know from our conversation before we came on the air that you very much look to that inner compass that you have to guide you in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And traveling is the perfect way to explore that, to think, oh, shall I stay in this hostel or that hostel? Knowing that the conversations that I would have as a result of the people I bumped into in that hostel would likely determine where I went to next, which in turn would open up another branch on that decision tree. It was just really good fun, just sort of going, ooh, you know, what do I feel like? What are the vibes telling me? And it worked brilliantly well.
And you didn't come back on time then?
I did actually come back at the time that I had booked my return flight for. But the time that I had there was just a revelation to me. I'm not saying that things always went well. In fact, a lot of them didn't, and some really sad and awful things happened. But it was just a magnificent learning experience. And I think another thing that really helped me with that was, because I'd gone over there specifically to write a book, that helped me to be one step removed from the situation. So if everything was just going awry, rather than freaking out about it as the old planner me would have done. I would just go, oh, this could be great for the book.
I love it.
It really didn't matter what was happening so long as it was interesting. I needed to avoid boring. And so that allowed me to be a bit less caught up in the emotion of the moment. And I guess that's how that's where we try to get to through meditation, to maybe not be so caught up in the drama of our own lives, but kind of be looking at it going, that's interesting. What's the learning here? So that was kind of like my real world experiment in that kind of Buddhist detachment in the good sense.
I like it. So let's go from Buddhist detachment and then tell us about a book by Deborah Veal.
Yes. So I used to think that to have an adventure, you had to be at least 6 foot tall and probably have a beard. It just seemed like all of the people who were out there climbing mountains or trekking to poles or sailing around the world were these big bearded guys. And so I think on some level, I love the idea of adventure. I love reading about adventures, either fictional or real. But I thought adventurers were those kind of people, and I was the other kind of people.
But you'd already tried the other kind of life.
I had, and then I read this book by Deborah Veal, as she was then, Deborah Searle as she is now. And she'd set out to row across the Atlantic with her husband. And he was your typical adventurer type person, about 6'5", really big guy. I think he was ex-Navy. And yet within the first week, it became transparently clear that he was not cut out for this adventure. He just turned into a quivering jelly curled up in the cabin, completely incapacitated by fear. And after a couple of weeks, had to be lifted off the boat and taken on board the support vessel. And Deborah, the wife, carried on her own and completed the crossing. And she's no bigger than me, about 5'4". Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, Although at the time, I didn't think there's something I want to do, but I think the idea lodged somewhere in my mind that rowing across oceans was something that short, maybe non-athletic women could do. And so, later on, that idea bumped into a few other ideas and a light bulb went on, and just seemed like a really good idea to go and row across oceans.
Once the light bulb went on, were you calling yourself crazy? Were you saying this is insane? What am I doing? Or did you just go, this is going to be the greatest adventure in the world?
Bit of both. I should mention that there was also partly emerging from my trip to Peru and seeing the retreating glaciers and also being exposed to indigenous wisdom in relation to the earth at the same time. I'd had an environmental awakening along with my sort of personal awakening. And when I realized how badly we're messing up the planet, I became almost panic stricken. I was just desperate to do something about this. I felt like no matter if it didn't make any difference at all, I couldn't just stand by and watch this happen. I just had to do my best, however insignificant that might be, to let people know about our environmental challenges. And so I was trying to find something that would create a way of getting people's attention so that then I could talk to them about my newfound zeal. And
your purpose, your calling.
Purpose, it was my calling. And so when I had that light bulb moment one day when I was driving along in my camper van, my first thought was, this is perfect. Like, this just ticks all the boxes. It's going to help me explore my own capabilities. It's going to be an environmentally low impact adventure that's going to be unusual enough to get people's attention. I'll be able to blog and write books and give talks and get my message across. I just thought, brilliant. And then I went, oh my God. I've never done anything really like this before. And so I spent a week trying to talk myself out of it. But with every passing day, I just found more and more reasons why it really was the perfect project for me right then. And so by the end of that week, I'd realized that if I didn't do it, I really would have betrayed all of that hard inner work that I'd done over the preceding 4 years. You know, all of these dramatic changes I'd made in my life, I had been looking for this. It had been leading me to this moment. And if I then turned around to life, the universe, whatever you want to call it, and went, nah, sorry, not on for it.
I'll pass.
Yeah, I would have been letting myself down so badly. So I just had to do it, really. And so I committed and told my mother, who was somewhat less than delighted, as you can imagine. But yeah, in my mind, I was going to make this happen no matter what it took.
I just realized, was just thinking about the timeline, and then we'll go into a little bit of prep here for your journey. How had your father's passing, if you don't mind me asking, how had that influenced things?
Well, when I had that lightning bolt of an idea, it was during the 6 weeks between when my father had a stroke and when he eventually died. And I suppose it'd be a great story if I said that made me realize that life is short and we have to crack on and do the things that are important to us. But actually, I think I'd already come to that realization, because when I did that obituary exercise a few years earlier, one of the other insights that gave me was, oh my word, I am going to die one day. And I think, when we're going through our childhood and teens and 20s, we tend to think that we're immortal. And doing that obituary exercise made me realize, wow, I'm actually not getting any younger. And if I'm going to do anything of significance in this lifetime, I better get on with it. And so I think I'd already had that awakening. I know for a lot of people, it is, like maybe in your case with your 2 near-death experiences, or for other people, it's a cancer diagnosis or the passing of a loved one. I think for me, it was actually more to do with that exercise that I'd done. So I was able to tell my father before he passed away that I was planning to do this, but he wasn't particularly himself in those last few weeks. So I'd like to think that on some level he knew and was maybe keeping an eye on me while I was out there on the ocean.
Absolutely.
But we'll never know. We'll never know.
So, but your mom became your superhero.
She did. Like I say, she was less than thrilled.
Reluctant superhero.
Yes. But bless her, I love my mum. When she saw that I was absolutely dead set on doing this, because for a while she just ignored it, hoping that it would eventually go away if she ignored it for long enough. But when she saw I was really going to make this happen, she thought, oh, well, may as well at least do what I can to make sure that Rosalind gets across the ocean safely. So when I was getting ready, Mum came and stayed with me for a month during my preparations to help me package up my food and get the cabin of the boat sorted out, and really the kind of domestic details that she felt able to help me with. And over the years, she's just been my staunchest supporter. And in fact, she grew to love it, because while I was out on the ocean, she would be the one who would check my emails and reply to people, because I didn't have the bandwidth all the time to do that. And my mum's quite adventurous herself. She went on a few adventures in her youth. She's originally from South Africa. She was adventurous enough to give up her life over there and move over to England in the mid-1960s to marry my dad. So on one level, she's only got herself to blame if I got the adventure gene. But also she just loved connecting with that global community that arose around my ocean rowing adventures. And in fact, she went through a stage a couple of years after I'd retired from ocean rowing of going, I do sort of miss your ocean rowing years, Rosalind.
Throw you back on the water.
No. Much as I love you, no. So yes, it's brought us a lot closer together. And that's been a really wonderful side benefit of those adventures.
Beautiful. So let's go to I'm picturing the beginning of your book where you're on. It's like a day before, and then you're on the starting line, and what the emotions were you were going through before things started. What were the emotions like leading up to it?
During the last couple of weeks of preparations in the Canary Islands, just off the coast of Africa, I think I was very focused on the preparations. I was, I suppose I'm a bit OCD about this kind of thing. Like I mentioned earlier, I really am a planner. I had my Excel spreadsheet there of all of the things that I needed to do.
Well, that was necessary. And from what I understand, you didn't have much time with your boat. So you had to like double check everything out, try to be as thorough everywhere else that you could be.
Yeah. There was so many different things to think about, and I got some really good advice during the pre-race boat scrutiny. I should mention the Atlantic row I did as a competitor in a race. The other voyages that I did, I was completely independent and solo.
But I'll mention here a competitor in a race, but there's still no support, and you can be hundreds of miles from your nearest quote-unquote competitor. So there ain't nothing and no one around you.
That's right. I didn't see any of the other boats after the first half hour. They were mostly crews of 2 and 4 people, so they pretty much took off quite a bit faster than me. And that was the last I saw of just about anybody, apart from very occasional visits, like twice in 3.5 months from the race support boat. So yeah, it's not like we were going along in a cozy little fleet and comparing notes every night. Mm-hmm. So I was really keeping myself very busy and being very meticulous in my preparations, which I think was a very useful distraction from really thinking about what I was about to do. And then the night before we set out, and the race start was actually delayed because a storm or the tail end of a hurricane was whipping through the Canaries, which maybe was a hint of what was to come. The night before the race actually started, there was a bit of a oh my word kind of a moment. What have I let myself in for? But there was absolutely no way that I was going to give up at that point. But I was pretty panicky on the race day when it all started. I was due to be the last competitor to leave from the dock, which didn't make me happy. It was like, they're getting away from me already, which is ridiculous because...
in the book, I'm getting butterflies about this. I'm falling behind them.
And I wasn't even at the start line yet. I mean, this is before I've even arrived at the start line. This is just paddling out of the marina. I was just having real wobbles that first day. I had a problem with my water maker. Even though I tested it just before I set out, the engineer had come along and been making some last minute adjustments. And the first time I tried to run it, it didn't work. It's only my most important piece of equipment.
For people listening, that's taking the saline water, taking the salt water and turning it into regular water. You don't get that. You don't got anything.
Exactly. Yes. That's what my life depends on. So I'd spent quite a bit of day one of the race with my bottom in the air and my head down in the hatch trying to fix this water maker. Did manage to do it with a bit of help from one of the other crews who gave me some advice. They said there was probably some air caught in the system. But that really rocked my confidence. I was like, can't even fix my own water maker. And also as a result of spending so much of the day with my head in the hatch, I was feeling really seasick. And that first sunset, I was hanging over the side, throwing up and just feeling kind of shaky and scared and very insecure and just like a real imposter. It's like, what was I thinking? I'm not up to this.
I want to pause you if I could for a second, because that what you just brought up, if you don't mind, is something I think so many of us feel through life. And you talked about feeling it in Oxford too, of feeling like an imposter, that I don't believe here. I don't know how they accidentally let me in. I don't know how I accidentally got to this place, but I don't belong here.
Yeah. And I suspect that I am not unique in these feelings.
No.
Um, and I suppose in the situation that night on the boat, and yeah, most of that night, I did try and row during the night. I did a couple of shifts. Um, but when I wasn't rowing, I was just like lying there in the cabin, and the boat's rocking around, and the waves outside sound really loud. And I'm thinking, how can my boat possibly be withstanding the force of these waves? They sound so powerful. So I'm half expecting my boat to break apart at any moment, and I'm feeling really queasy, and I'm terrified. But I'm like, I can't give up. I've invested all of my life savings in this. I've invested 14 months of my life into preparing for this. I've told everybody I'm going to do this. All these people are supporting me. I've got to keep on going. I do think there's a lot to be said for having enough naive optimism to get yourself into something and then too much stubborn pride to get yourself out of it.
I like it.
So I really just had to hang on in there. And I think if anybody listening to this is going through that sort of imposter phase, just hang on in there, because I think everybody goes through that at the start, and probably women more so than men. Men, it's all to do with testosterone, but there's this classic research showing that, various different research studies actually showing that if women are shown a job description and they've only got 8 out of the 10 qualities required, they'll go, oh, I'm not sure I'm ready yet. A guy will be much more likely to go, oh, I've got 3 of those and I'm sure I can learn the other ones as I go along. It's so true. And so I suppose when I'd set out to do this crazy voyage, I probably thought it was going to be much more about rowing. I only realised as I went along it was much more about survival and seamanship. So I'd managed to kid myself that I was at the 8 out of 10, whereas maybe I really only had the 3 out of 10. But that stubborn pride kept me hanging on in there, and I grew into it. I grew into the role. And I think if we can just hang on in there and not quit during those very wobbly, scary early stages of anything new, it's amazing how fast we grow and adapt and start to fill out that role. I just felt like I was so far outside of my comfort zone, it wasn't even funny. But
well, you're far from shore. You can't see land. Anything that happens is all you. And the ocean, which you talk about in a TED Talk you had a love-hate relationship with, is not exactly an easy companion.
Oh, no. I definitely learned why seafarers have a reputation for bad language. There were times when it really helped just to let rip and give the ocean a load of verbal abuse. Didn't make any difference to the ocean, but it made me feel a lot better.
I heard that was one of your greatest coping mechanisms, running to the front of the boat. And scream therapy. I don't recommend it if you work in an open plan office, but sometimes just going and thumping a pillow can be very therapeutic. So I did as time went on, and I struggled every single day. And I felt like I was failing every single day. But also many days I would have a little aha moment and I would figure out another technique, find another tool to make this more manageable. And often it would be just a way of reframing the way that I was looking at the situation. Mm-hmm. So there was one day when my internal dialogue was extremely negative. I was really grumbly about how uncomfortable everything was. I had tendonitis in my shoulders, and I had saltwater sores on my bottom, and the rowing was uncomfortable because my oars had broken and I'd had to patch them up, and my sleeping bag was damp and mouldy, and everything was just so uncomfortable. And just that word uncomfortable reminded me, I sort of had this little duh moment when I remembered that in the run up to the row, whenever any journalist or anybody had asked me why I was doing this thing,
I'd sort of heroically said, it's because I want to get outside my comfort zone.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Then I went, oh, hang on a moment. Getting outside my comfort zone is going to be uncomfortable. And so I went, oh, so the fact that I'm so uncomfortable means that I'm really succeeding in what I set out to do. I'm not the failure that I was thinking I am. It's actually, this is it. This is what I wanted. And in fact, looking back now with the wisdom of hindsight, 10 years later at that first voyage, and it was horrendous. I mean,
well, you picked a record year as far as being put into a blender.
I did, yeah. It was. There were more named storms in the Atlantic that year than any other year since records began. And as a storm, you have to be a certain size to be worthy of a name. So yeah, it was just the worst possible year to be out there. Year of Hurricane Katrina was one of the big storms. So yes, my timing could have been better, or could it? Because one of my wishes in going out there was to really push my limits to find out what I was capable of. And if it had been a lovely, calm, tranquil year out on the Atlantic, I wouldn't have tested my limits. I wouldn't have learned half of what I did learn out there. There were so many times I thought I was getting right to the snapping point where I was really thinking, I just don't know how I'm going to stand this for a moment longer, because all of my dialogue was about frustrated and I was really giving myself a very hard time. But then I would think I was about to hit that point of snapping, and yet 2 hours later I'd still be there on the boat and still not quite insane and still sitting there at the oars plugging away at it. And I'd realised that snapping point really just existed in my own mind.
Why? How? Was it a faith? What at that point when you're right on that quote unquote edge? What was the mechanism that was keeping you going?
Well, there were some times when I would get so bored and so frustrated because I'm doing 12 hours of rowing a day, and my stereo's broken, so I've got no kind of entertainment or brain food going on at all. It's just me and my own thoughts, and a lot of those thoughts are very dark and very negative. And so I reached some points where I'm just like throwing down your hands, just kind of going, ah! And then I go, oh, well, that didn't help.
I'm still here.
I'm still here. And there's only one way I'm going to get to the other side of this ocean. So, well, let's pick up these oar handles and see if I can stand to do another 10 strokes. Mm-hmm. So you do another 10 strokes and then you go, oh, well, maybe I could do another 10. And I often found that if I could just get through that slump, that momentary slump, then I could keep going. Sometimes I failed. Sometimes I just went, screw it, I'm going to go and have a nap and see if I feel better when I wake up. And sometimes that's just what you've got to do. See if you're in a better mood after you've had a few nice dreams about friends and food and being on dry land. So it often felt like I was staggering across that ocean. You know, it really was just hanging on by my fingernails. But somehow the miles gradually got ticked off and the days passed, and I won't say things ever got really easy on that first crossing, because it just seemed to be one thing after another, as you'll know from the book. Really everything that could go wrong did. But gradually I found these different techniques and things got a little bit better.
Let's talk about, I'm thinking of my bike ride across the country, which for those who haven't heard, I won't go into great detail, was 5,000 miles, 40 days, solo unsupported. So it was 12 hours a day, pretty much every day of riding, with a lot of tears and boils and sores and fevers. And I came, two things happened, among other things. First off, every day something was going to go quote unquote wrong. And at the beginning, those were horrible. And then after a while, they actually empowered me because I knew something was going to come up. I didn't wish it, but I knew I was going to get through it no matter what. Yeah.
So you developed that resilience, that confidence that you knew.
Like you're fixing your oars.
Yeah. So you knew you could handle it because you'd handled similar things before and got through it. And it does reach that point where you're like, what next? But whatever it is, I believe that I can get through it because I've come through so much already. And I really believe that's how you build the confidence. I think we often feel like we need to have the courage or the confidence in order to embark on these adventures. Mm-hmm. But I've realized that's wrong. That's the wrong way round. It's only by putting ourselves out there and facing all of these challenges that we develop the courage and the confidence to keep on going. But it takes that sort of like extra like mustering of our courage just to decide to do the thing in the first place. But once you can get over that hurdle and just really commit to making it happen no matter what, that's when all of the good stuff really starts to show up.
It's funny. Before I was reading your book, before I was even thinking about it, maybe my subconscious was thinking about it last week, a big theme in my coaching and I think in several of the shows as well was about unmooring the boat. And that once you're unmoored, everything can change.
I love that Andre Gide quote about one cannot discover new oceans without having the courage to lose sight of the shore.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And once you've lost sight of the shore, it's also, and I can bleep myself, it's your oh shit moment.
It is. And that's, I suppose it's the ability to keep going through those oh shit moments. In fact, another one of my favourite quotes is Winston Churchill. And he said, success is the ability to go from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And I'm actually not sure the enthusiasm is even required because there are a lot of days on the ocean I didn't feel particularly enthusiastic. But I did manage to somehow go from from failure to failure, whether it was enthusiastically or not. And eventually I did succeed.
I love it. So I want to talk about that. And the thing, back to my bike ride again, the second thing that occurred, and I believe this happened with you too, is I started becoming the observer, cheering myself on. So I would get an interview and an interviewer would say, how did it go today? And I'd say, well, we did great. You know, we covered 150, 200 miles, whatever it is. And they go, I thought you were out there solo. And I'd say, well, there was the me on the bike who was really struggling and in a lot of pain. And then there was the me cheering me on. For yourself, you talk about in this line, you talk about Mr. Self-Doubt, Mr. Critical, and Mr. Competitive as if that wasn't you.
Yes. Those annoying little demons that were giving me a really tough time out there. It somehow helped me psychologically if I could personify them and distance them from me. And I picture them like these sort of ugly green little devils that were just kind of sticking their little needles in me and really annoying me. And that helps. And it also helped, a bit like you did on your bike ride, for me to think about the future book that I would write or the speech that I was due to give in New York shortly after I only just finished the row in time. Because then I was really thinking about how am I going to describe this later on to people. So again, it was that observer and the observed that allowed me to detach from that sort of negative emotional drama that was going on in my head. And often I would say things out loud like, oh, poor little Rosie, she's feeling really sorry for herself today, but, well, let's just get to the oars. And I know it's supposed to be a sign of insanity to be talking to yourself, but actually, I found it really helps me because by putting the words out loud, it somehow took them out of my head. And it was when I got caught up all in my head and in my negative mental chatter, that was where I had my real struggles. So it was such an amazingly steep learning curve. It really was. But it taught me so much about, and I'm sure you found this with the cycling, doing an adventure like that on your own. And in fact, if anything, maybe my rowing was a bit like, I don't want to be rude about Kansas, but I'm just thinking of an example of a very flat state with very long straight roads in it. And when you have that lack of visual and sensory stimulation, I think it could be, your mind can take you into strange places, but it's learning to manage that self-talk and to focus on the positive things, and even to welcome the bad things as opportunities for growth. That that's really helped me so much to cope with lots of other kinds of challenges back on dry land.
How much I'm thinking about, please finish, then I'll jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, there were many times when I was on the Atlantic and all of these things were going wrong that I would think, any moment now, I would just love to have a blessing that's not in disguise.
Oh, man. How much and when did the switch flip for you start to giving yourself kindness and compassion toward yourself?
There was a switch flip. I'm not saying it stayed flipped, but there was definitely a switch flip when my satellite phone broke. And this was quite intriguing because you would have thought that would have been the worst day.
No, because I had this, my phone didn't break, but there was a point at which I wanted no phone. My radio had died. I wanted no communication or anything except actually with my mind over time, which was the weirdest thing.
Yeah. And what prompted that wish on your part?
A hellish evening where I was stuck on the side of the road. It was, I had stopped off at my home while traveling across the country. I had run out of money. I had to sell my one prized possession, my motorcycle, to keep me on the road because the funds hadn't come in. It was doing this as a fundraiser to help people with learning disabilities and ADD, and the funds hadn't come in. I got myself back on the road, one of my longest days, raining through me through the evening hours, and I'm on a highway that they hadn't repaired the side of the road since it was built in the 1920s or 30s. So I had to walk my bike for 56 miles. And I'm in the freezing cold. I'm walking my bike. I'm absolutely miserable. I'm shivering badly. And then the clouds parted and the moon came out. Oh, and my lights had conked out, so I'm in the dark.
Oh.
And in that moment, I felt such incredible peace and, for lack of another term, oneness of being. I didn't feel alone anymore.
Yeah.
And
wow.
After that, instead of being afraid of the dark at night, and like I had literally had on the highway before I was stopped riding, I had a tandem or triple truck go by me with such speed that the turbulence blew me off of the road.
Whoa.
So sort of like getting hit by a big wave. And
yeah.
Since that point, my fear of the night went away, my loneliness went away, and there was a peace in the silence.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So that
wonderful.
And so I shut everything off. And so when you talk about your phone breaking, I'm going, I get it. I so get it.
Well, in a way, I felt like, oh, this makes perfect sense. I came out here to find out. One of the things I wanted to know was how self-reliant can I be? Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, I guess I wished for this. And even though I felt really bad for my poor mum because I knew she'd be really worried about me, I wasn't actually, for my own selfish sake, I wasn't too upset when I couldn't manage to fix the phone. And I think one of the reasons that this was such a profound change for me was because up until that point, I'd been getting weather information via my satellite phone. Mm-hmm. And if it was a good forecast, then I'd be getting all excited about making really great mileage. And if it was a bad forecast, I'd be getting all anxious about the upcoming storm. And most of the time, the forecast was wrong anyway.
And I'm guessing most of the time, you couldn't actually do anything about it. You're in a rowboat.
I know, I'm going really slowly. It's not like I'm in a sailboat and, can take advantage of good winds. I'm just, plodding along at 2 miles an hour. And so when the phone broke and I no longer had access to that information, I just stopped worrying about the future. I think it also helped that my mum had been letting me know when the other crews arrived into Antigua or when they got rescued. And even if I was even envious of the ones getting rescued, because it was like, oh, it's over for them. And, without dishonor, wish I could quit without dishonor.
Why wouldn't something just break that I can't fix?
Yes, I know. So then when the phone broke, it was just me and my boat and the ocean. And I just kind of relaxed into it. I transformed from all of those worries about things that might or might not happen in the future and just went, oh, well, I'll just take it as it comes. And it was just so relaxing at that point. I did end up having a few more worries. A few more things went wrong, like when I discovered that I'd misplotted the position of the finish line. So I actually had 60 miles more to go than I'd realised. And then there was a bit of drama with the sea anchor as well. But by hook and by crook and, by the skin of my teeth, I did make it across that ocean without going completely crazy. And woohoo! And it was such a brilliant feeling to step ashore after 103 days at sea and give my mum the hugest hug and just to really own that achievement. And I'm sure you felt much the same way when you finished your bike ride. And I realised that the more blood and sweat and tears, quite literally, that have gone into something, the greater the sense of achievement when you get to the other side. That if it's all been easy and plain sailing, so to speak, then it's like, oh, well, that was fine, all went smoothly. But it's the things that really test you, that really build your character.
It is, and it doesn't have to be from a young, brooding this thing out. It can be a being in the moment. Your journey was more an inner one than an outer one.
Yeah. Yes, it very much was. And they were pretty stormy oceans in my mind for much of the time. And in fact, now one of my favourite meditations is to sort of picture myself on the surface of the ocean. I love scuba diving as well. And, sometimes you'll go out on the dive boat and it's all very choppy at the surface and you're feeling a bit seasick by the time you get to the dive site. But then as you descend under the waves and you just go into that very peaceful, calm, quiet place, and the serenity of that is just, and I suppose it's a bit like, I don't know, returning to the womb, that you can, if you love scuba diving, you can feel very safe in that environment.
So I've got a few wrap-up questions. Before I do that, you have another adventure that you're on right now. Maybe the word right is appropriate, in a very different sense. I wonder if you can share with us.
A kind of literary adventure, yes. I'm embarking on writing another book, and this one is about courage. And I've become quite intrigued by this because quite often after I've given a talk, people say, oh, I could never do something as courageous as you. And I realised I don't really identify with this word courageous, because most of the time that I've done these things, all I've been aware of is a whole ton of fear. And so I became fascinated by this. And in a way, it harks back to what I was saying earlier about we only develop the courage and the confidence as we go along. At the time when we set out on these voyages of discovery, mostly what we're feeling is fear. And I think it's so important that we don't think that courage is the prerequisite for really stepping up and playing our parts in the world. And I think this is especially important for women, because we're still not, like, allegedly 50 years after equal rights in much of the Western world, we're still not hearing enough women's voices. We're not seeing enough women taking up positions of power in companies and in politics. And I think a lot of it is cultural obstacles, but also I think a lot of it is that we struggle with our own self-talk and our self-imposed glass ceilings. And so if I can help more women to, I suppose, this is not original, but to feel the fear and do it anyway. And I think the way that we do that is by connecting to a huge sense of purpose, some higher calling, So when we're weighing up that equation of, am I going to do this thing or am I not? We manage to outweigh our fear by having that greater sense of purpose. And that's how we get through it. Damn it, I think I've just told you the plot. But that's where I want to go with this. I would love to hear from your listeners, and I know that you have many. I would love to hear from everybody, men and women, about their attitudes to courage. Where in their lives they wish they had more courage, where in their lives they do have courage, and what they think their lives would look like if they were able to show up more courageously. Because I do think that we live a very different life when we're willing to surprise ourselves every day with our own courage than if we're perpetually making fear-based decisions.
I love it. I love it. So, perfect segue. Where can people go to find out more, to find your book, and to get in touch and let you know their thoughts on courage?
That would be fantastic. The easiest way would be to email me at Roz, R-O-Z, or R-O-Z if you're American, at rozsavage.com. I do also have two websites. If people want to find out more about the rowing, all that stuff is at rozsavage.com. I also have a coaching website, which is very originally at rozsavagecoaching.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. So please feel free to find me on any of those. And I have a ton of videos on YouTube. And I have a ton of podcasts. I think that just about covers it.
And if you didn't catch that, if you're driving down the road and you didn't catch any of the Roz Savage goodness there, come on over to inspirenationshow.com. We'll have the links to get you over. So what do you recommend, going back to your book for a brief moment, what do you recommend for parents and moms to teach their daughters about courage?
Well, apart from buying my upcoming book, you mean?
Well, we've got a few months to wait. This is kind of giving them a teaser. So there's going to be, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more than you can share in a minute here.
Well, of course, they could also read my blog. But what would I say? And I love that question because I do think it's something that can start at a young age. And I think this might be tough advice for some parents, but allow them to get hurt. Don't wrap them in cotton wool. Allow them to make their own mistakes. Whether we're talking about physical hurts or making mistakes or having projects that don't work out quite as they planned. I love the work of Carol Dweck and her growth mindset. And I think this is like a very practical way of being more courageous, because the contrast here is, if you tell your children, your daughters, oh, you're beautiful, you're clever, you're the greatest, then if they ever run into a situation where they're not the most beautiful or not the most clever or not the most great, that's going to come as quite a shock to them. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you tell them, wow, that's really, I love the way that you sat down and worked hard at that and you really thought it through, and look how you're putting these ideas together and coming up with a new idea. If you're able to praise the process rather than the outcomes, that's going to really set up your children with the attitude that even when the going gets tough, they're the kind of person that can figure out a solution, that they can get through this. And that's the growth mindset. And I don't think my parents ever taught me that explicitly, but I think they did somehow impart it to me in other ways. And they also, again, I don't know if this is good advice. I'm not a parent myself, so I'm not claiming to be an expert in parenting, not on any level. But my parents moved house quite a lot when I was growing up, which I found really tough at the time. Really tough. I felt like I kept getting ripped away from my friends and plonked down in a new school in a new part of the country. And I certainly didn't appreciate it at the time. But looking back now, I can see that being forced to adapt to new situations in that way um, really helped me to cope with meeting new people and living in new places. And knowing that I can adapt to new situations has been very important, as you can tell from my life since. So your children probably won't thank you for any of this. Please don't tell them that I told you this. But I think sometimes parents, for all of the right reasons, want to really, really protect their children.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that it always does the children a favour. I think allowing them to get hurt, to make mistakes, to fail from time to time, gives them the resilience and the grit that they need to succeed in adult life.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing on that one, even if the kids aren't thanking you in this moment.
Well, let's face it, most kids don't thank their parents anyway.
Well,
So,
that's true. That's true. So, from there, a few quick wrap up questions. First off, most importantly, what personally gives you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
oh, so many things. The greatest joy comes from being out in nature and those moments of beauty when you were hanging out with the moon that dark night on the badly repaired road. I love hanging out with trees and the moon and stars. That's the greatest joy. But the greatest sort of woohoo is feeling like I've really connected with somebody and had a meeting of minds and a formative conversation with them. So even though for your listeners, we're not having that conversation in real time, I would love it to get comments back from them that hopefully will tell me that something I said resonated with them and in some way gave them the strength and the resilience to get through a challenging situation. I really think that so much of the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of the conversations that we have and the people that we choose to surround ourselves with and whether they support our dreams or not. So I hope that I have managed to support some other people's dreams in the course of our conversation today.
Thank you so much. I must ask, and you may have already just shared them, but any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
Oh, I suppose that, okay, I'm going to plump for this one. I remember reading in a wonderful book called Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh that every single thing that we think and say and do says something to the world about who we are. And I do remember at the time going, yikes, that's a pretty heavy burden. But actually, I really do believe that every day we are creating our own reality. And I think we must never underestimate the significance of tiny choices and tiny actions. And I look back at my ocean rowing adventures, and it took me about 5 million oar strokes to row across those 3 oceans. And one oar stroke didn't get me very far, just a few feet. But millions of those tiny actions added up to the most amazing adventure of my life and the most fulfilling experience of my life. And every single one of those oar strokes counted. And in the same way, we construct our lives by the tiny things that we think and say and do and choose. And the more careful and conscious we can make those decisions, then the more wonderful the quality of our lives will be. So, here endeth the sermon.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And I have to give that a mighty woohoo.
Woohoo! Michael, it's been such a pleasure talking with you.
It has been such a pleasure and an honor, Roz, and we support you in all your upcoming adventures. And everybody, send in your comments to her. Let her know your thoughts. So thank you so much again for everyone out there. This is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, lose the mooring, and set sail, or rowing that is, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Thank you. This was awesome.
That was great fun. Thank you for being so well prepared and asking such lovely questions.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!